I'm Dr. Nafis Alam, and this is Nonprofit Program Evaluation. Macro practice in nonprofit program evaluation. Macro practice has three functional definitions. It's organization, community, or policy. It's anything that's not clinical and you're seeing the client as non-human. There's a relationship between micro and macro practice in that client problems may at times appear micro when they're in fact macro. Some examples include if a family is evicted and unable to find housing, it appears to be a micro problem, but the citywide lack of housing options is actually a macro problem. Wait list at the VA for veterans mental health services might seem like a micro problem, but the lack of availability itself could be a macro problem. And project housing and gang affiliation by youth could be seen as a micro individual or family problem. In fact, it's actually, or could be also an organization, community, or policy level macro problem. Micro social workers and macro social workers, it's important for both groups to have a mutual respect and professionalism toward one another. There's an importance of previous micro experience for those who practice macro level social work, and of course vice versa. There's an importance of LMSW bosses respecting LCSW subordinates, because there's always that power struggle that goes on there. Macro level change is profound in some ways, not so in other ways. Most social workers want to work with individuals and families, and they don't necessarily want to work with communities and organizations, at least from what we've seen thus far. There's a pursuit of immediate change, whereas macro change takes time, but macro level change tends to be more widespread and lasts much longer. It could be several generations that change lasts. There are values and ethical considerations in macro practice. Service, building dependency versus promoting autonomy. You've got social justice, challenging injustice. You've got the dignity and worth of the person, self-determination and autonomy. Sometimes this could be at odds with service. You've got integrity, trustworthiness, and consistency. You've got competence, being informed and skilled. And at the macro level, there's an importance of self-care. It is lonely at the top, and few will understand and sympathize with your stress because you'll be seen as the person who works fewer hours, makes more money, but rarely will people understand the level of responsibility you carry, as opposed to being responsible for a singular client or a singular set of clients. You may be responsible for an entire organization, an entire community, or an entire policy. Lifespan of nonprofit program evaluation. This is a sample lifespan of program evaluations. You first start with a needs assessment. Does a social problem exist? If so, a proposal is made on how to intervene. Formative evaluations are used to adjust and enhance intervention in the beginning of a program's life. Process evaluations fine-tune services focusing on implementation. Outcome evaluations gauge the amount and direction of change in a client before and after intervention. And cost analysis evaluations study the efficiency of a program, cost to benefits evaluation. Needs assessments may sometimes be done for existing programs looking to add intervention modalities, like an expansion to MICA, if you will. Aids decision making in resource allocation, program planning, and program development. Want is defined as what people are willing to pay for. Demand is what people are willing to fight for. And a need is defined as the basic requirement to sustain the human condition. With need, you're breaking it down into perceived needs and expressed needs. Normative need is defined by an expert, like a federal poverty level of $11,770 for one, and then you add $4,000 per person more. Felt need is defined by the self, a feeling of poverty despite being above that line. Expressed need is the official request for services by clients. And comparative need is determined by those receiving services versus those who don't, inferring one population's needs to another population's. These are some of the questions answered by needs assessments pertaining to demographics. What does the community look like? Timeliness, are existing services outdated? What are current pressing needs? History, have needs changed over time? Demand, gaps in existing services? What are the weaknesses in the community? What are the strengths in the community? And the resources available in the community versus what's needed in the community. Formative evaluations are done at the beginning of a program, not before, but at the beginning. They seek to influence initial development of program. They identify strengths and weaknesses of a new program. Interviews with staff, clients, agency records, participant observations. Different ways to do formative evaluations. You got locating model standards versus getting expert consultation versus forming committees. Once a program has been established, then you conduct process evaluations. And a process evaluation fine-tune services so that interventions are most effective. Formative evaluations influence initial development, but process evaluations can be done at any time, even at the end of a program's life. Program monitoring is the program, is the program doing what it was designed to do? Program objectives are defined and stated in such a way as to place the activity into a specific target date and into a, the activity into a specific target and to a date. So you might say something like increasing admissions 10% by December 31st, 2015. So that might be the way that you state that, that objective. Quality assurance asks, are all state and federal regulations being met, compliance being met, accreditation being met? Outcome evaluations are any evaluation measuring the rate of success of a program using reliable and valid metrics. Client satisfaction studies are sometimes put underneath the category of outcome evaluations. They try to understand the client perspective. It's an inexpensive, easy way to interpret and can be implemented quickly, shows clients that you care about them. But there are problems with satisfaction studies. They don't actually measure outcomes. Results tend to be skewed toward who answers and who doesn't answer. Participants' biases, lifestyle, and culture cannot be controlled for in client satisfaction studies. Cost analysis evaluations, the ultimate breakdown with this comes down to efficiency versus effectiveness. Effectiveness is doing the most, which tends to be the micro perspective, and efficiency is doing the most with the least, which tends to be the macro perspective. Cost effectiveness and cost benefit. Programs must show that it is most effective at the least cost, meaning it is the most efficient. And efficiency then turns savings into growth. It demonstrates a good use of resources with minimal waste. Cost effectiveness analysis takes into account the cost of a program in relation to outcomes. So you might take X number of dollars to educate a child until they graduate from high school. Cost benefit analysis then takes societal benefits into account, and it sort of asks how much did we save by having a child graduate and not be on welfare. In conducting a cost effectiveness analysis, you're defining the program and its outcome indicators. Goals and objectives are clearly defined. Then you're computing costs, calculating all program costs, personnel, technology, overhead, etc. Collect the outcome data, then you analyze program data, then you compute cost effectiveness ratio. A cost effectiveness ratio is a total cost divided by the outcome. So you might have $275,000 divided by 48 clients. That's $5,729 per client. Is that good? I can't tell you whether or not it's good. You're going to have to determine that on your own by comparing your program to similar programs during a similar time frame. And you're performing a sensitivity analysis as well to make sure that sensitivity analyses help us decide what approach we should use in providing services. It's not enough just to be effective. It's not just enough to be efficient. It's important also to be sensitive to the community that you're working with. Diversity and difference in nonprofit program evaluation. You have to remember that diversity involves the inclusion of opposing and conflicting ideologies. You start where the population is. You develop a cultural humility by asking, what experiences have I had with members of this population? What self-identities and attitudes do I bring to this situation? What are the power imbalances faced by this population? Listen to different perspectives from population members, identify key informants from that population, include diverse voices and perspectives in articulating issues faced by the population. You then assess the impact of difference, discrimination, and oppression, explore the discriminatory and oppressive issues faced by the population, what stereotypes or generalizations confront this population, how has this population been discriminated against and oppressed, do members of the population feel marginalized, and if so, then why? You search the professional knowledge base on the population, identify concepts and issues related to growth and development, what sources of the professional knowledge base are available to this population, what theoretical frameworks are available that will help understand the population, what factors or characteristics gleaned from the knowledge base on this population will help understand that population. You assess social relationships and structures, what structural and environmental forces are affecting this population, and you develop strategies for authentic engagement by creating opportunities for participation, who is involved in identifying the need for change, what principles can be used to guide meaningful engagement, what methods can be used to engage diverse populations, you work with groups of population members, allies, and advocates. You ask yourself, who are the allies and advocates of the population? What can be learned from these allies and advocates' experiences with this population? And how can relationships be built and maintained? Assessing community and organizational problems in nonprofit program evaluation. You gather information by identifying community or organizational condition, identifying the relevant historical and contextual information that's available to you. Has the problem been recognized and addressed by the community, the organization, and by the literature? Explore the professional knowledge base on the condition, the problem, need, or opportunity. You locate relevant theoretical and research resources, and then you access or collect data. You, of course, make sure to disseminate data, make it accessible to the population, and then you frame the problem and develop working hypotheses by doing ongoing research and evaluation. Understanding communities in nonprofit program evaluation involves defining the community. Community is not confined to geography. You can have online communities, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You've got special interest communities coming together for a particular cause or a movement. You got Gemeinschaft, which is defined as mutual, intimate, and common bonds pulling people together that are relationship-oriented. And you can think of this as a process-oriented approach. And Gesellschaft, which is defined as formalized relationships that are task and end game oriented, which you could see that as a product oriented perspective. Dimensions of communities can include the physical, geography, space, place, or territory. It can include social, relational, can be physical, but can also be non-place, such as a religion, race, or profession. Here I have the NASW membership as an example of that. It can be political, functional communities working together as a group to address social problems. And all three can coexist. An example of that would be people living near each other can develop strong relationship with each other in pursuit of change. In this case, it could be political change. Community functions are broken down into production, distribution, and consumption, which are the activities designed to meet people's material needs. Socialization, which are the activities designed to guide attitudinal development. Social control, which are the activities designed to ensure compliance with norms and values. Social participation, which are the activities designed to promote interaction with others in the community. You got mutual support, which are activities designed to care for those in need. And when community functions fail, stability is jeopardized and there's the potential for deterioration. Assessing communities in nonprofit program evaluation involves first identifying the focal community. You have to learn about historical context and population characteristics, detailed demographics. You have to identify and collaborate with the target population, determine community boundaries, not just the physical boundaries, but also the economic, financial boundaries, the educational boundaries, and the philosophical boundaries. You have to locate data and information on community needs, issues, and problems. You identify community data sources, then you gather information specific to target population needs. Assessing community social and political assets includes the focus on community strengths, values, and differences. Strengthen community through difference. You have to locate sources of power and resource availability. It's all about funding and resources in that particular category. Then you assess community structure and capacity by examining service delivery units. Understanding organizations in nonprofit program evaluation first involves defining the organization, which will be a collective of individuals gathered together to serve a particular purpose, and the purpose then would be an objective or an outcome. There are four frames to describe organizations. The structural frame describes the role of structural architecture in determining roles and relationships and assigning tasks within the organization. The human the human relations frame examines the relationships among people and how people relate to the organization. The political frame sees organizations as arenas in which power and politics play out among individuals and groups, and the symbolic frame views the organization as an interplay of artifacts, values, and underlying beliefs. Distinctions between these approaches: the descriptive approach intends to provide a means of analyzing organizations in terms of certain characteristics or procedures. This is a sociological approach. You could also think of it as process-oriented. The prescriptive approach provides how-to guides to build better organizations, and that's, of course, a product-oriented perspective. Organizational structure is the way relationships are constituted among persons within an organization. Individuals working in concert can accomplish more than the same number of individuals working independently, and the focus is on division of labor so there are no gaps or overlap. Two of the biggest threats to revenue in all businesses tends to be gaps and overlap, so all businesses must regularly assess for gaps and overlap. Authority here is defined as power wielded with the consent of those being led. There are three forms. The first is traditional authority, which is a right to govern bestowed upon royalty. Authority rests in the ruler's claim to historic and ancestral rights of control, can be passed from generation to generation. The next is charismatic authority, which is the dominance exercised by an individual through extraordinary personal heroism, skill, or traits. It tends to be unstable and transitional because authority is tied to an individual rather than to a position. Then you have rational or legal authority. That's power assigned on the basis of ability to achieve instrumental goals, and it's derived from the legitimacy given to rational rules and processes forming expertise instead of hereditary claims. Evidence-based management then focuses on the tendency of people to make decisions based on personal experience, overall impressions, and instincts or gut feelings. EBM, evidence-based management, proponents agree experience has merit, but managers cannot make good decisions based on practice wisdom alone. You combine the three elements, which includes findings from empirical research, which is the research component, expertise of administrators, which is the experience component, and of course information regarding the preference of service users, which is the client component. Very similar to evidence-based practice, evidence-based management. Assessing human service organizations in nonprofit program evaluation. The attributes of human service organizations include people as the raw material to be worked with. Moral values guide the service process. Morals must be legitimized by the unique environment. Focus on doing no harm to clients. Dynamics of cultural competency and diversity of community must be assessed for and met. Client-worker relationships are at the core of human service work. You identify the focal organization by searching for cultural artifacts. You ask, what is the history and goal of the organization? What is the mission of the organization? You want to learn about the organizational domain. What is the identity of the organization? Who are the clients? What are the resources and funding avenues? You assess the organization's environmental relationships by identifying and assessing the relationships with revenue sources. You ask what percentage of funds come from what sources, what are the tax benefits and accounting loopholes, what in-kind resources can be found, like facilities or technology, computers for example. Identify and assess relationships with referral sources and other providers by building relationships with state and federal regulatory bodies. You ask who are organizational competitors, and is there a demand for services, or is there a surplus of service supply? You assess internal organizational capacity by understanding organizational and program structure. You ask, does organizational structure align with the mission statement and community assessment? You understand management and leadership style. How does organizational hierarchy function? Do employees feel valued, or are they assembly lined? How is conflict handled? And you assess the organization's programs and services. Are organizational practices meeting community expectations? Are policies and procedures clearly outlined? You assess internal organizational capacity, this is continued from the previous slide. You assess personnel, policies, procedures, and practices. Are employee handbooks clear on yearly evaluations, promotions and raise procedures, equal opportunity employment? You assess the adequacy of technical resources and systems, budget management, are resources responsibly allocated, who's making the tough calls, quote unquote. Facilities and equipment, is the building modern and accessible? Is the technology modern and accessible? Information technology and management, you ask, are staff able to document out in the field through laptops or their phones through secure URLs? You assess the cultural competency of the organization, which is very important by assessing the cultural competency in external relationships. You ask what efforts are made by the organization to stay up to date on community and diversity dynamics. And then you assess whether the internal workings of the organization are diversity friendly by asking questions like, does the organization promote diversity in employees and clients? Building support for proposed change in nonprofit program evaluation. You have to put research before all. This includes the community assessment, review of relevant literature, and of course small-scale pilot studies. You want to develop the intervention hypothesis. What did you learn from analyzing the community assessment, the literature, and the pilot studies? Do you have the resources and the direction to address community needs, or is this best left for another party? You want to define the participants who first recognized and brought attention to the problem, who will be doing what to address the problem, are there legislative barriers to any steps, who will benefit from the change, must include the community as well as the stakeholders like the funders, how can the community, including other organizations, be engaged in changing the community, thereby having the community buy in to becoming a stakeholder for themselves. And the importance of business-to-business partnerships cannot be overstated. Determining openness and commitment to change is important. How did past attempts at change go in this community? You want to strengthen the collective identity. Is there a unified focus and direction that's realistic? You want to use social media to strengthen the collective identity. You want to identify outside opposition to change. Who will oppose this change effort and why will they oppose the change effort? Selecting appropriate strategies and tactics in nonprofit program evaluation. There's a difference between process targets and product targets. Process targets, where organization has full control over. Product targets, the organization only has influence over. You want to assess the political and economic feasibility. What is the urgency in addressing the problem? How long has the problem existed? Is the problem an emergency? Is the problem recurring? Select a change approach, whether it's effectiveness, which will be micro-oriented, or efficiency, which will be macro-oriented. You want to select strategies and tactics. Here, strategy is defined as overall efforts designed to ensure that the proposed change is accepted. The tactic are the specific techniques and behaviors employed to maximize the potential success of the strategy. You want to consider strategies and tactics. How can change be started? What are your contingency plans if the chosen plan doesn't work? Consider campaign strategies. Who needs to be convinced that change is needed? Who needs to be convinced that proposed strategies and tactics will be effective, like social workers in the community? And who needs to be convinced that proposed strategies and tactics will be efficient, like funders and governing bodies? You'll have to focus your efforts based on whether or not that particular party is more focused on efficiency or effectiveness. What resources are available to tap into, including grant writing. Planning and implementing interventions in nonprofit program evaluation. Here, inputs are defined as resources and raw materials. Processes and activities are the use of inputs. Outputs are process targets, as in what will the interventions be. Success is more measurable at this level, less subjective and less philosophical. Whereas in outcomes, these are product targets. What will the influence of the interventions be? And success here is more subjective and more philosophical, less measurable. And the impact is in the community or organization-wide changes as a result of outputs and outcomes. Evaluating interventions in nonprofit program evaluation. You'll conduct a process evaluation. You'll monitor technical activities. What is the appropriate sequence of activities for achieving the objective? Who will do what? What are the deadlines? Monitor interpersonal activities. How enthusiastic are key players? What is the strategy for dealing with poor performance, apathy, or resistance? You want to monitor clients and beneficiaries. These are intended services reaching intended targets. Assess completion of process objectives. Was process objective achieved? If not, at what point in the process did it become unsuccessful? What corrective actions are needed? Now, in conducting an outcome evaluation, you're recognizing the types of error. Is there a risk of erroneously concluding that change was successful? Is there a risk of erroneously concluding that change was unsuccessful? Are evaluation efforts asking the right questions? Consider the sources of error and corrective steps. Are procedures in place for guarding against confounding variables? You want to evaluate the balance between outcomes and costs. Are the outcomes worth the cost? Building leadership in nonprofit program evaluation. If you want to become engaged as a community leader, you're going to develop and communicate a personal vision, a mission statement, if you will. You'll set realistic and specific goals. You'll set a clear itinerary for goal achievement, strategies and tactics. You'll recruit talent that aligns with your vision. You'll assess your own competence and plan for improvement. How will you build your own abilities in developing goals, motivating, managing, explaining, representing your brand? You'll also assess your group's competence and plan for improvement. How will you build your group's abilities in developing goals, motivating, managing, explaining, and representing your brand? You'll envision the leadership of the group. What specific talents are best for what specific tasks? Can you assess talent? Can you assess goals? Can you match talent to task? How much manpower is needed for a task? Too many chefs in the kitchen can be a problem, so too can too little support. Does the pursuit of individual tasks line up with the overarching goal is a question you'll have to ask as well. You want to set leadership development goals. What are the group's strengths? What are the group's weaknesses? Your greatest strength will always be your awareness of weakness. Select methods for developing leadership. Teach as you lead. Train staff with a purpose. You'll provide access to experts if necessary. Recruit new leadership. You'll foster an environment of leaders, not followers. You'll enhance collaboration within and across groups by facilitating work between staff. Everyone has their own task, but only in the context of the overarching goal. Be sure that staff are experts on the goal and the task. This is where innovation is born. Frontliners have no choice but to think of strategic ways to be efficient. Why not learn and share that which they glean with all staff? Be flexible but persistent. You'll balance doing and delegating, and you want to be a part of the team. Promote leadership as service and distribute credit. You'll promote adaptation to new situations, take responsibilities. So you always focus on solutions and not problems. Every task is important to the goal. You're only as strong as your weakest link, so you'll either develop it or you'll terminate it. Indicate how you'll build through leadership, recruiting talent, foster an environment where talent and potential can be fulfilled, and you'll match the right talent with the right task. Issues in nonprofit program evaluation. Treatment fidelity is defined as the congruence between the way a program is designed and how it is carried out in practice. Infidelity can occur when clients don't follow treatment plans or when staff deviate from procedures and protocols. And a lack of fidelity threatens internal validity. A program may be seen as effective when it really isn't, and of course vice versa. Ensuring treatment fidelity, in order to ensure treatment fidelity, staff must be well trained and supervised, staff must have clear and achievable directives, and group meetings should be held to continually discuss service delivery. Program drift is also bound to happen. Over time, programs get modified and morph into something different from what they were originally intended to be. For example, a child welfare organization providing financial planning to parents to address recidivism. Politics, any evaluation can be perceived as political. Evaluations are intrinsically threatening. People are suspicious of a hidden agenda. There are ethical dilemmas facing the evaluator, especially if the evaluation is negative. Political pressures on evaluators include the push to present agency in the best possible light, to ignore unflattering findings, to focus on strengths and not weaknesses. The guidelines for evaluation in politically charged environments is just to maintain as much independence as possible, negotiating a contract, getting information from as many sources as possible, and to explain the purpose and methodology of the evaluation to staff. The threat of evaluation is that everyone fears negative evaluation. Employees may see this as an excuse for cleaning house, and sometimes that may indeed be the case. There's also an emphasis on cultural sensitivity in that you're assembling an ethnically diverse team for data collection and analysis. Lay people from the community should be invited to collect data, use instruments that have been tested for cross-cultural validity, translated into another language might be one of the options that you have available to you. Being aware of cultural differences and identification. For example, a Hispanic person may be white or black. Self-identification may differ from person to person. You may also want to offer a small monetary incentive for people's participation, but there are conflicting thoughts on that. These are some theories related to the issues in nonprofit program evaluation. Theory X posits that people are lazy and will avoid work. People can't be trusted. People prefer to avoid responsibility. People lack self-motivation. People prefer to be told what to do. Whereas Theory Y posits that people inherently do not dislike or avoid work. People are self-directed and have self-control. They are committed to their work. People seek responsibility and autonomy, and people are creative and resourceful. Theory X is more consistent with scientific management, while Theory Y is more consistent with sociological management, although you'll see plenty of crossover between the two. Theory Z is a newer idea where you're actually bringing together Theory X and Y in larger organizations where everything is compartmentalized into smaller groups, and those smaller groups may employ Theory X versus another smaller group within that organization employing Theory Y. Ultimately, the major issue in nonprofit program evaluation comes down to efficiency versus effectiveness. Once again, effectiveness is doing the most, which is the micro perspective, and efficiency is doing the most with the least, which is the macro perspective. Often you'll have staff that are so focused on doing the most for their community or their organization or their policy that they don't take into account the costs associated with doing the most, versus the macro perspective where people may be so concerned with the amount that change will cost that they're apprehensive toward doing anything effective. So you can be over effective in that sense, or over efficient in another sense, in that you're not willing to spend the appropriate amount of money to create the appropriate amount of change. Ultimately, this is what ends up being the major struggle in most nonprofit programs. Budget and resource development planning in nonprofit program evaluation. Here we'll have a brief step-by-step overview of the grant writing process. First, you'll identify the problem or goal area for which funds will be sought. You'll develop relationships with grant makers. Search for grant opportunities using government agencies, private foundations or donors, corporate foundations or businesses. Consider the proposals fit with the identified funder. What is the grant? What is the size, the duration, the restrictions, perhaps even geographic? What's the history? Do the same parties get the award every time? Is there room for new proposals? The conditions and milestones that need to be met, and the importance of walking away from a bad fit cannot be overstated. Continued again, step-by-step overview of the grant writing process. Here you'll consider a meeting with a funder. Face-to-face conversations with agreed upon minutes are the clearest conversations. If you and your funder decide to do business, you'll review literature to start your work where academia leaves off. You'll include the funder in every step of the process: planning, human resources, deliverables, obstacles, changes in the community, etc. Transparency with your funder is paramount, even more so than transparency with your staff. You'll create an evaluation plan that clearly defines success and failure. You'll prepare a budget for the program. You'll plan for sustainability, showing that you can survive without the funder, and that will then have the funder want to keep working with you. You want to also diversify your funding sources, and if a proposal is rejected, find out why. Once again, I'm Dr. Nafis Salam, and this has been Nonprofit Program Evaluation. Thank you.